Time has been called. Competitors, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statements. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. The timer will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by holding up a red card. You may begin.
We are currently sitting on a farm bill that, whether we like it or not, is crucial to our economy. Banks must be willing to lend to our farmers so that we can continue to produce. I believe that Farm Bureau plays a key role to ensure that this bill will be passed not only now, but in the future.
I have a quote that's in my office by Thomas Jefferson. It says, "Agriculture is our wisest pursuit because in the end it'll contribute the most to real wealth, good morals, and true happiness." And so in this discussion, I hope we can really identify ways to stimulate the American economy, or as Thomas Jefferson puts it, that real wealth.
It is a general rule of economics that increased productivity stimulates local, state, and national economy. Agricultural productivity comes from an increase of outputs and through yields and weights. We can use modern sciences, smart money choices through farm bills, free trade agreements, and new innovative ideas to stimulate this economy. Impressive growth has been made over the last 100 years in agriculture, but I perceive continual progress.
Cicero said that a diligent farmer plants trees of which the fruit he himself will never see. We know in agriculture that we don't get today's profits without yesterday's efforts. To continue with that, to continue to be viable, strong, and growing an economy, we need three things to happen. We need financial stability. We need a sound farm bill. We need investment, further investment in research and development so that we can have the future technologies to allow us to be vibrant. And lastly, we need to adapt and utilize technology on a local level. Each farmer needs to understand their roles at their place.
You have heard the opening statements. The competitors may now proceed with the discussion. Competitors, please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
You know, Neil, I would like to, you mentioned in your opening statement the concept that banks must lend money to farmers to have growth. As a loan officer for Farm Credit, like that's super close to my heart. And so I want to know, I guess, how you see that, I guess, impacting economic growth in our communities and, I guess, on a macro level as a whole.
Well, and in my statement, not everybody is dependent on the banks, and so it's a hard statement to take in for some, but as a whole, I think that a lot of people, a lot of those producers are dependent upon those loans. And we have to make sure the banks have the confidence in order for us to continue to produce. If they have nothing backing them, we're up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. And so we have to make sure that happens. And that's why I brought that in, because I don't like to depend on the government. I hate it. We all do. But it's a fact that it's crucial to helping us survive. As farmers and ranchers, we depend on that. And we need to make sure, through the Farm Bureau, that we can assist in that and push that agenda through so we can have a sustainable.
I agree with that, Neil. And although we are too young to remember really the 80s, when we had runaway interest rates, I know there's many in the audience that have nightmares of that still, and we need to thank them for surviving that time. If we look at trends of what, and you're going to be able to explain that better than we are, but the trends have shown that right now agriculture, it's a good bet to invest in. But we know that we need to have, farming has changed to very energy and capital dependent operation now. We've got to have market trends and market signals that go back. The Farm Bill is one of those major signal setters that lets our banks and our lenders know that it's a sure bet, it's a safe bet to allow farmers to continue to farm.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the 80s because, you know, right now we are living in a time where agriculture commodities are high and there's a lot of money. And sometimes I see farmers where it's like, oh, we've got the money, we don't want to pay taxes, we don't want to pay the government, let's go buy more machinery. But, you know, this is part of the smart money choices, you know. And Benjamin Franklin, he said that even a little leak can sink a huge ship. And the thing is if we get to where we're overspending as individual farmers and we start going bankrupt, then we're going to take this whole thing down, because that's what lenders are worried about. And you know, just this last month, my husband and I have been working on a farm loan, and they only want to loan like 65% of appraised values. Well, as young farmers and ranchers, it is really hard to come with a 35% down payment on a loan. And so you talked about the Farm Bill. It is crucial that we get that 5-year support so that bankers feel like we're a safe bet. So if we go back to the 80s, we don't bankrupt this whole thing.
You know, I love the first part. I mean, like what you said about, I guess, farming is good. We know it's good right now. And so people are saying, well, let's avoid taxes. I guess an economist that I watch really closely, his name is Dave Cole out of Virginia Tech, and he talks a lot about how we need to put in a working capital. And if we have to pay taxes this year, let's build up our working capital. We won't need cash on hand in order to cover expenses while we're going, in order to continue to grow. And so when things do go bad or go sour, or commodities prices follow the trend back down, we're prepared for that kind of situation. Because before we can help stimulate economic growth or help expand our operation in order to do that, we need to be secure right now, here we are today.
So Erica, from what I'm understanding then, is we need access to affordable capital to utilize wisely. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, and I guess we do need the capital side of it, to borrow money, but also the side of it, when we make money, we need to keep some of that money in liquid assets in order to continue to grow.
But as we go back and think about the Farm Bureau in the consistency and sustainability we need in the market, what we're looking for is, in the 80s, we had runaway inflation. Mm-hmm. It was capital and loans were there, but they were not affordable. So what I'm hearing is what the Farm Bill needs to give us is the access to affordable capital, affordable financing, to allow us, like Renee's talking, that we can go and invest and make the proper decisions. The money's got to be affordable for us to be able to be profitable. Is that correct?
Well, and I guess I'm coming from a different perspective in a lending background, and I guess I see it when a young farmer walks into my office and says, we want a startup loan, we want an operating loan. We pull through his financials and dig through things, and we do our very best to make it work for him.
Well, and so far with stimulating the economy, we've talked about the money part of it. We know that we have to have access to money to make this work. But after we get the money, there's the agricultural part of it. And Farm Bureau is, kind of like the small government. So we don't want this big farm bill, that controls every part of us. But one thing I do have to talk about that I think we need in the farm bill is increased funding in agricultural research. I think we live in this day of biotechnology when our research ability is there, and we need the money to move forward to the next step in research.
Well, then how do you think that will, I guess that research, the big thing to talk about, will stimulate economic growth? I mean, I guess what's the thing?
Can I tune in on that just real quick? Lene, you brought that up, and I'm glad you did, because that was on my paper, making research. By 2050, we have to double our production. Without this research, without continuing and improving, optimizing our production, we won't be able to do that. Erica, you talked about farming is good, and it is. We're in a good spot right now. We have a good opportunity, and a lot of people are jumping on that bandwagon. But we have to put the money into research, and that's a hard thing to take. I was talking to a guy just about this exact thing, and it seems to me like the big guys always do the research and the little guys benefit. It seems like we can't get everybody to come in. It's such a crucial point, but not everybody can jump on that bandwagon.
And I think that's a great opportunity to maybe change our skew. As we've seen, the Farm Bureau's I believe the Farm Bureau will give, or the Farm Bill will give us more stability than just research or bureaucracy. It gives us the market signals for stability. But as we talk about research, over the recent years, public research funding has actually decreased while private research has increased. Overall research funding has increased, but the private sector is stepping up. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The private sector tends to be a little bit closer to the market, while the public sector research will be more of a long term. Some of those returns are up to 30 years. But as we talk about that, the things that we need is, how do we marry the two together? How do we take the big guys, the Monsantos, the Cargills, how do we take their private research arm and marry them with the public research arm to use the stability that land-grant universities give us with the funding that comes from private? I'd like to talk about that for a moment. How do we make sure that we're getting the best out of our bang for our buck?
And we talk about the big ag research like Monsanto. Okay, so I come from small family potato farm, small family cattle ranch, and the thing is any research that is done in the agriculture industry, from Monsanto, the private, the government, whatever, it does come down to where it is benefiting us in our operations because of this new technology. And mostly in the Midwest, but it's coming out to us, is precision ag planning, where they have so much in technology that they're using data retrieval to maximize and figure out, okay, where can we get more yields? Where can we get more weights? And they're starting to use this, and we are seeing increased yields, increased outputs with the same input, and that's what stimulates the economy.
And that's
To really answer your question, I guess, sorry about that, that marriage between the corporate world and the land-grant universities, I see it, the corporate world is going to be the world that does the heart of our research. But once they have the final results of that, they have to have peer-reviewed journals that say, yes, we like this, and we're going to pass it on to the family farm. And so that's where the land-grant university steps in, and they say, you know, as my master's project, I'm going to take this peer-reviewed, I'm going to take this project that Elanco or someone has done, and I'm going to make it my project, and I'm going to test it again, and I'm going to peer review it and write about it, and say, yes, I believe in this product. And at that point, we get back to the family farm and implement it.
Yes, thanks, I appreciate that. The technology not only is it coming this way, it's being used. On our farm, we went to a variable rate speed potato plant, and our yields increased by doing exactly what you said. So I just want to point that out. They're actually here, and we as farmers, whether small or big, are able to capitalize on that because the technology is becoming more affordable and more affordable.
And I think that's a very key point there, Neil, is the technology, and that was one of my last points, we have to have, on a local level, we have to have adoption and understanding the technology. Every farm needs to be aware of the technology, but they need to know how the technology works for them. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. In my work, I do nutrition work. I was at a feedlot the other day, and we were looking at rations. I was shaking out boxes. We were looking at the particle length of the mixer. And the owner said to me, he says, I had no idea nutrition involved all this. All you do is look at poop and feed. Well, the reality is there's research behind that says that, but he had to take the leap of faith to let me come on to pay for my services. That's his leap. The next leap is I have to give a return on investment, but it's a give and take. We have the research coming down, but we've got to have it at a local level. The farmers have got to do their due diligence, no different than what Erica talked about peer review. If they're not implementing on a local level, it doesn't matter what land-grant universities or the private institutes are doing. If there's not implementation and understanding, every farm's going to be different, but there's aspects that every farm should do. We've got to get to that point as well.
Well, and so we're talking about like on a local level, okay, so we get the money, we've increased productivity on a local level with potato. Another part of this that we're missing, and this is the part where Farm Bureau plays a big role, is in our free trade agreements, our exports. If we don't have the political backing of these free trade agreements, there won't be anywhere to move our product. And you know, without having a viable free trade agreement export, it's not going to increase our economy. And I just, you know, it's interesting because we're at this point where the country, Colombia, in 2011, we exported $832 million of agriculture products to Colombia. And that's just one little country that is needing it. And so we have to get these free trade agreements flowing, and Farm Bureau needs to take this to the government and get it started so we can push this economy to the next level.
A part of that comes back, you're right, I mean, in 2010 we set the all-time record for $115 billion in exports. So we're on an uptrend. Foreign countries not only need our sources, but they trust our sources. If we could spin back, I think that's a key point, but let's go back to technology a little bit because you can bring up the EU now. We've got, and a lot of research, we've seen dramatic growth in yield returns, and a lot of that's come from genetic modified plants. Yet the EU will not allow that. How do we make sure that we can take the technology, we can sound it out, we can verify it through research, but we can make it palatable not only to the producers, the consumers in the United States, but throughout the world as we grow those exports?
You know, go ahead, Neil.
Thank you. You bring that up, and I think that's an excellent point. How do we capitalize on that? In my opinion, and history shows us that demand always produces results. And so the demand will be that production are showing again, I quoted this earlier, we have to double our production by 2050. We understand that. There will be a demand out there, and I believe that we have to continue on that. And when that demand is there, we will meet it. And if we don't, someone else will. And we need to be in the forefront to make sure that does happen.
So how do we make that palatable, I guess is my question.
You know, I guess to answer that question, so I was kind of thinking on a different track, but that palatability of our export market, and you spoke about before the European Union and how they're not, I guess, they don't want to take those exports because of the GMOs, and you know, I really think they're not, I mean, they're a huge economy, but maybe they're not where our market needs to be faced right now. The demand and those consumers that want our product are in those BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And that's where we're seeing our exports go. And I think in the future, as those countries continue to grow, that's where we're going to see them flow.
Well, you know, it's not just like those big European countries. Idaho Farm Bureau, through AgriSource, actually has a program where we ship Idaho wheat to Mexico, to a company in Mexico that makes breads and sends them all over the world. And for the first time, through Portland, Oregon, we had a barge that hauled Idaho wheat to Mexico. And that is a great trade system. But the problem is now Idaho has started in corn that we're not even necessarily raising enough wheat to fill our mills, let alone exporting. We've got to keep that yield productivity up.
Well, that's the trick, is to keep that productivity up so that we can continue not only supply for ourselves, but we need to keep that free trade, keep our export going. That's what stimulates the economy, to supply enough for ourselves, but as well as get it.
One thing I think, of course, Idaho, wheat is a big part of the industry, but the biggest ag industry in Idaho is dairy products. And there's dry powder plants in Idaho that are shipping thousands and thousands of pounds of dry powdered milk to China every single year. And so I think that we say, well, Idaho's not being productive and not exporting. You can't ignore that huge dairy industry that's doing that every single day.
Go ahead, Zach.
I was going to say, you're right, Eric. It's very important that we need to look at ourselves locally, and we need to each look in the mirror as a producer and say, what can I do to do more? But we also have to have the scale and the scope of an international producer. It doesn't matter if the wheat gets sold in Mexico or it gets sold in Lewiston. It gets matter that it gets sold and that our farmers can reap the best return on the investment.
That's exactly right. And we need to be conscious of what is happening in these third world countries. The reason, I come from a dairy background, and I grew up on a dairy farm, and the prices have come up and down like they always do, but they've stabilized somewhat. That's a tricky statement to say, but because of foreign countries and their, I guess you could call it evolving into more modern countries, we are now, as a reason, we're shipping more of this kind of milk to China. So that will, again, stimulate the economy. So we have to make sure we're aware of that and keep that balance.
And I think we can spin back on that, Neil, and talk about going back to research and development. A lot of the research and development being done is not just for production crops, but it goes back to food safety. A couple of years ago, I worked in the dairy industry, and I had a gentleman spend a year with me from Beijing, China. He was head of my company's dairy division over there. At that same time, we had the melamine scare in the baby formula in China. He said people in China want milk. At that time, the affluent class, which boggles my mind, the affluent class of China, which represents 320 million people in the population of the United States, drinking about 5 gallons of milk a year. The opportunities are huge, but they don't trust the data, they don't trust the research coming from the government. Part of that research and development we need to do is we need to be willing to say we need to produce more. We've also got to make sure that it's safe, healthy, and that the consumers appreciate that.
And that comes back to what Erica was saying about peer-reviewed journals, to make sure our data is backed up, it's reviewed, and we can sign our name by it, knowing that it is safe.
So you guys talking about the trade, the local level, you brought up the dairy sector. Okay, one thing I have to say though is on like the dairy matter, we have to produce enough hay to provide these dairies with their hay for their needs to even do this exportation. And I think it's so important for our generation to get those new ideas. The University of Idaho has a research team that has turned dairy manure into a biodegradable plastic. Like, that is so cool. We need those research. And I come from a valley where they fight over water, like a family feud, really bad. But the thing is...
In the West?
Yeah. Well, the Lost River Valley, they're expensive. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, I look at the water system in that Lost River Valley, and it's 100 years old. We are using a 100-year-old water system. My family, we received 70% shrink on our water rights this year. And I keep thinking, we keep talking about like the aquifer and how do we refill it and all these types of things. And I think that if Farm Bureau could get them to work, we probably can't get them to work together, but if Farm Bureau could get us to come to realize the value in our water, Idaho water, there's a huge value there. Put in systems, that maybe even pipeline it, but then there's still a percentage that you run down the river and sink in the aquifer. I really think these new ideas that we stimulate is a big key to getting enough hay raised to produce the dairies, get the exports. We do have to start on a local level.
You know, Lene, I think you bring up some really good points, a couple things along the way, and that goes back to what I mentioned before. Each individual farmer's got to take it, implement into their own technology and research. Last year in the drought, we were very short on forage, and the Midwest was extremely short on forage. They went and found that you could put hydrolyzed calcium in with corn stover or straw and could increase the palatability and digestibility of that. That was a huge growth. That research was done in the 70s. All of a sudden we're saying, wow, this is amazing. If we can do the research, but if it goes in the Journal of Dairy Science, the Journal of Animal Science, and no one does anything with it, we're stuck. So we've got to take advantage, and the Farm Bureau, in my mind, is an opportunity to be a sounding board, to make us aware, to get us into groups like this. This is probably one of the best things they can do, but at the end of the day, it comes down to we've got to be willing to say, yes, I need a portion of proceeds to go to research, both in the public and private, and yes, I'm going to listen to experts, I'm going to listen to land-grant university, I'm going to listen to a variety of experts to help me implement that technology so that I can grow and progress.
You know, I love that, because I think what we're talking about, to both of your guys' point, is that idea of like a value-added product. Because there's research that's been done for, like you say, since the 70s, and we know about these value-added products. Hey, if we add this to straw, all of a sudden it's, you know, it's palatable for dairy cattle to eat. And so identifying what are those value-added products that we can begin selling or manufacturing to at the end of the day, bring more value back to our farms, or back to, you know, the economy as a whole. I know one thing that's happening, I guess, in my backyard essentially. The Chobani plant was put up in Twin Falls last year, and recently, about 3 months ago, the Cliff Bar announced that they were going to begin manufacturing right in Filer, and they're going to be utilizing essentially a waste product, that whey that prior to now was just fed back to dairy cattle, to produce a product that is needed. And so at the end of the day, we're having a value-added product to again stimulate the economy.
That's exactly right. And you talk about value-added, exactly back to your point with the additive to straw to make it more palatable. That's one of our issues we have, is that although that research at that time did not pay off, it paid off huge now. And so I think some of the thing we have to make sure that people understand the value added to our research dollars, because we don't know, maybe it won't come out today that research is valuable, but it came out later on. And that's why I push research, because you never know where that's going to go. And it's so hard to get the little guys to put into that, because they can't see that value added. But Eric, you make great points on that value added, how we can make that research count.
Well, and one thing though is we have to be careful that we're not taking it so far to create, you know, slime or whatever we're creating that the general public goes, oh no, we're not going to eat this. I mean, we have to still produce, you know, valuable products. But you know, the whole thing about this, our science, the money, we know that by producing affordable food, it will stimulate our economy, you know, increasing the agricultural productivity. But I just think that there's so many ways that we can take this further to the next level. You know, I grew up on a cow-calf operation. And you know, it's interesting because now we raise grazing corn, and so we don't feed hay in the winter. These cows eat the grazing corn, we sell the hay to dairies, and then we feed pulp out of Rupert. You know, like we're finding new ways to create feed sources. And it's great, they're healthy, they're fat, you know. I think if we continue to keep coming up with ideas, and the money side of it, it is hard to come up with the money, but we have to be able to, we can't like take a risk and go bankrupt, but we have to be willing to try. If we don't try,
and that's calculated risk.
Calculated risk.
Go ahead.
No, fishing.
So cordial.
So, and I think we can go full circle as we're in the last 5 minutes, we can start to wrap up. But one of the places, you know, we talk, where does Farm Bureau fit in this? And obviously have a big place. It all comes full circle. We established early on in this discussion that we need funding, both private USDA, we need private funding as well as public funding. As we look at, we need sustainability for our capital markets. We need to get that funding. It comes back to how can Farm Bureau help us? That's probably the best place. We need to come to consensus as a group, as a state, as counties, so we can tell the federal, American Farm Bureau, we need to have a Farm Bureau bill that devotes a certain amount of money towards research. Right now, the talking heads, the reason there's so much fighting there is they want to put so much money into nutrition and human nutrition, which is important, but we can't do that at the deficit of research. All these things we've talked about come back to that importance that we've got to keep research the focal point, and we've got to make our voices heard to make sure that those outside of production realize the importance of research.
When we make our voices heard through Farm Bureau, we understand that. But I believe we have to make sure we have a balance. We can't be overfunded in research. We can't be part of this. We have to have that balance to create an even flow for everyone. And that's a tough thing to do.
Well, and I think it comes back to our individual stewardships. We have to do the best we can with what we are given. Whether it's big, whether it's small, we have to be responsible, take on those financial responsibilities. But you know, it's so important that we use Farm Bureau, their lobbyists. You know, we already had a topic on government regulation. We have to have those limited to be able to move forward in the economy, because if we continue to have the red tape, it will limit us to what we can do.
And it comes back to everything that we've talked about. What we talk about every discussion meeting, every time, it comes back to putting it down. When the rubber meets the road, we have got to do so. We have got to be heard, put our 2 cents in, make sure Farm Bureau understands from ourselves to our community to our state.
You know, I like I feel like Farm Bureau has the big side of it is the policy side of it, but there's a whole other section of Farm Bureau that we haven't even, I guess, touched on that plays into this whole role. It is, I guess, the education side. Education for us as young farmers and ranchers, and the education for the public that Farm Bureau does through their advocacy programs. And so I think once we know that we need to move the Farm Bill forward and push our policy, we need to make sure that we as producers are educated on what's the newest technology and what things we should be implementing. Participate in these sorts of events in order to, grow and learn, and then as Farm Bureau go ahead and say, let's host someone that's going to help, a financial talk for our young farmers to come in here, and how do we need to set ourselves up in a good way to move forward in this economy.
Erica, you make a great point, and as a young farmer, I grew up on a dairy farm, very simplistic, old tractors, no technology. What was done 100 years ago, we still do it, right? Well, I got the opportunity to move to Idaho, and I saw this technology take place. And what an eye-opener that was. What a neat experience. So now this technology is coming to the rural farmers. And so to capitalize on what you're saying is just, it is such a neat thing to see that technology come to play and benefit everybody so that we can all enjoy the benefits.
So if I'm hearing correctly from the course of our discussion, I think the things we've identified are we need to have sound, consistent funding. We've got to have access to affordable funding. We've got to have continual research and development that allows us to continue to expand production, expand into foreign markets, increase profitability. And lastly, each farmer has got to take onus of their own stewardship and identify, there's so much technology, we've all talked about, there's so much. We use every piece of technology, we're going to be out. How do we make them all work? And the Farm Bureau kind of is the icing on top that can be, if lack of a better word, a milking stool that holds those 3 legs together. They're the ones that can be the foundation of all of it.
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask that the audience remain silent for 1 minute to aid the competitors in their preparation. In involuntary order, please stand and give your 1 minute closing statement.
As I look back on my ancestors, my great-great-grandfather, Hiram Jensen, was among some of the first to settle in the Lost River Valley. Another great-grandma was raised on a dry farm outside Newdale, Idaho. This last summer, I listened to my grandma tell of pulling sagebrush and clearing land as a child. Today, I look at us young farmers and ranchers in this remarkable era of agriculture, and I question, what more can we do? But as I learned from today's discussion meet, we are just as much agriculture pioneers today as were my ancestors. This new age of science and biotechnology is increasing outputs and exports. Dreams for more efficient irrigation systems and byproduct usage gives us a profound desire to be involved in agriculture, produce affordable food, and take on financial responsibility. This drive will increase agriculture productivity, stimulate our economy, and help us prepare to feed the world in 2050.
It's fair to say, looking back on our ancestors, that we as young farmers and ranchers have inherited success. To be able to feed the world in 2050, we need to be able to pass along greatness. The way that's going to be achieved, and we've talked about it today, is we need to adopt and understand how to use technology. We are a technological generation. We can be the ones that can carry that torch to expand and utilize technology properly and profitably on the farm. We need to have the assistance of the Farm Bureau, and specifically in government. We need to have stable policy. Particularly, we need to have a 5-year farm bill. And last but not least, we need to all participate and engage and be willing to accept and ask for further research and development, because we all know if we don't plant today, we will not harvest tomorrow.
You know, I keep that quote in my office from Thomas Jefferson because I love the idea of real wealth and what that real wealth means, because every day I'm working with farmers, and I'm working with them bringing cash in and bringing cash out, and how they can utilize that cash and how I can lend them cash to be more productive. And so really through this discussion, I think we identified a few real strong ways that we help promote that real wealth or economic growth. And you know, as I jotted a few things down, and the first one I really, I guess, stuck out to me was finding that export market and pushing that export market, you know, out of the doors of Idaho and the farms of Idaho into the homes in China and Russia and India. And then the second thing was having those value-added products and establishing those products and continuing them on the line so that we can begin being more productive on our farms beyond just hay and corn and cattle. And overall, I think that this discussion really established the ways that we can, as a group and as young farmers, continue to promote that concept of real wealth.
Eisenhower stated that farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles away from the cornfield. Sometimes it feels like we have no control over what the economy does and what goes on in this world. As we've discussed, we realize that we can and we do make a difference. Our outside-the-box thinking, our voice to go forward and be heard actually works. I enjoy talking about funding, researching, and each farmer taking control of their operation. I believe if we continue on this path, and we continue to put the money into research, and continue on the avenue that has been created by Farm Bureau, we can and will meet the demands of 2050.
Let's show these competitors our appreciation for